Welcome to another episode of Have You Heard podcast. My name is Matthew Soares, here with my co-host Ryan Doherty and our special guest today, Eric Hurlock. Eric, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, if you're in the hemp podcast, Eric needs no introduction. As the host of Lancaster Farming's Industrial Hemp podcast, does one every week. Good news updates, and always typically has a guest in the industry and provides really good content there with the newsletter online as well. And Eric, could you just give us a little background for the people who might not be familiar with you or your work, what you do in the hemp space?
Yeah, sure. I'm Eric Hurlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming newspaper. I've been there almost 8 years. I was hired to run the websites, and they always encourage you to, sort of follow your passions and try to build new audiences. So I started covering hemp before the 2018 Farm Bill. Actually, in 2017, I saw my first field of hemp at the Rodale Institute in Berks County, Pennsylvania. That was, I think, July of 2017. And, I had read Jack Herer's book many years ago, and all of a sudden everything came flooding back to me as I stood there next to this, wonderful stand of, 4 acres of what I guess was fiber hemp at the time. And I was super excited. I was like, oh, good. Now we're going to, start to move the needle. Like, we're going to start making things out of plants. It's going to be great. Here comes the new paradigm. I did not expect to see CBD. Like, that caught me by surprise. But anyway, the following year in 2018, I took it to my editor. I'm like, hey, can I start making a podcast? He's like, yeah, sure. That sounds interesting. What's it going to be about? Well, industrial hemp. And they weren't so sure that was the right way to go. And they were hoping I would maybe change topics after a while. And I thought maybe, I would cover hemp a little bit and then move on to dairy or, other things. But I was just captivated by this industry for many reasons. Like, one, you never see an industry like put itself together, right? Like, I'm a child of the late 20th century and everything was already established, right? But here's this new industry putting itself together, and I was just fascinated. Like, picture the Michael Jackson popcorn gif where he's just eating the popcorn, right? That was me, just like, wow, industrial hemp. It's exciting, right? So I didn't know anything really about it other than what I had read in the Jack Herer book in the early 90s, and then what I talked to the farmer at Rodale about. So I just started, looking people up and asking them questions. My first interview was with Jeff Whaling, the executive director at the National Hemp Association. And he was very gracious. He was like, sure, come up to the farm, because he lives here in Pennsylvania. And, I sat with him for like 2 hours and he gave me like the full download, right? Like everything about what you could use hemp for. And plus, cannabinoids, all that stuff. So right off the bat, I was hooked, and I started publishing my interviews in this podcast, and I've never really looked back, because there's always someone new to talk to. There's always some new development, some new policy change. So it's been a wild ride for me, and I'm mostly interested in this new industry because of the climate change mitigation potential, right? It's like you hear things like, when you're older, your kids are going to be like, Dad, what did you do about climate change? This is what I'm trying to do about climate change. I'm trying to educate. I'm trying to like help push the paradigm. I want to get us off of, extractive models of manufacturing and get us into regenerative models. And yeah, so that's my answer, I think. Was that my introduction? I'm not sure, but anyway.
Yeah, no, and I love it. I think that is what enamors so many people about it. I always think about that episode or the scene from the Truman Show where he says, "I want to be an explorer," and the lady pulls down the map and says, "Well, you're too late. Everything's been explored." That feels like many other industries. It's not new and it's not as exciting and coming to the scene. Even though we have hemp stories from long, long ago, it does feel it's the most exciting entrepreneurial ride I can imagine. And I really appreciate your perspective on that. And you're kind of, like you were saying, your first interview was with Jeff Whaling, and I know you are next to Hemp Builders and Hemp Rodale Institute, and you're kind of in a hub there in Pennsylvania. Can you tell us a little bit more about why Pennsylvania is a hub and why hemp's already taking off there more so than other parts of the country?
Yeah, well, I would like to say that it's taking off amazingly well here. We still have some hurdles, but historically, this we grew hemp here back in the 1600s, right? Like at a certain point, farmers were required to grow hemp, so it's just kind of like in the DNA of the state. I think we're the Keystone State, and we're so close to so many different markets up and down the East Coast. So for me, it's like we're poised to be this perfect epicenter of hemp. We're not quite there yet, but there's some great people doing amazing work here, like the Hempcrete Builders. I was lucky enough to meet Cameron McIntosh from Amerishawn Cast Hemp, pretty early on. And I met him through Les Stark and Erica McBride Stark. Erica is the executive director of the National Hemp Association. Her husband, Les, is a hemp historian who, wrote a book about all the different hemp mills here in southeastern PA from the 17 and 1800s. So interviewed them, and, the sort of, you interview somebody and that leads to more interviews. So I was lucky enough to meet Cameron and just what he's doing with Hempcrete and, bringing in the e-Reezy spray system. It's great. And there's a fair amount of, Hempcrete projects that I've gotten to see through my connections with him. And we also have a really supportive Department of Agriculture. I think my third interview was with Russell Redding, the Secretary of Ag. And that was back in 2018, before the Farm Bill. And yeah, he got it, and they had the pilot program, and they've been very supportive of hemp projects. In 2019, of course, we had the CBD, just, craziness. And like I said earlier, I was caught off guard by that. I thought it was, very interesting, but it's kind of a distraction from where I was hoping things were going to go. And, it's settled out a bit since then. But I think, unfortunately, it left sort of a bad taste with a lot of farmers here, because a lot of people put a lot of money into it thinking it was going to save the farm. And, they still have barns full of CBD hemp from 2019, which, of course, has led to the Delta 8 thing. But that's a different conversation altogether. But yeah,
I was going to ask just about that. Did you see a large, we saw in Colorado and in Kentucky, huge shift 2019 to CBD, and now kind of a shift back. Was it as drastic in Pennsylvania, as many people pursuing cannabinoid options? And do you see a big focus and shift coming back into fiber and some discussion of more fiber processing and projects, especially in your region, coming to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was well over 500 growers in 2019, and I would guess it was like mostly cannabinoids, right? There was a few people who, were they were trying to grow fiber, but obviously there's no processing stuff here, especially then. So it was a lot of people who were trying to figure it out, right? The advice that I was given by people that I interviewed, like, how do you get into this? Start small, grow a little bit, try to figure it out. So yeah, back then, so much CBD, that obviously has truncated. And now I'm just happy to see there's a lot more discussion about fiber and grain too. Here in PA, we've got Wenger Feeds, and one of their brands is Chickies Creek. And through, a lot of hard work from their people, they were able to get permission to feed hemp grain to laying hens. And so within Pennsylvania, they can market these hemp-fed eggs, which is great. I would like to see that, throughout the United States, not just for chickens, but we can talk about that in a bit. But yeah, the Hemp Feed Coalition is doing great work there.
I'm curious about the other, the network of Pennsylvania is so interesting. You guys have a legendary group of farmers called the Amish, and tons of people who interact with them and have great relationships, and other companies that they support and such, have they shown an interest in the cultivation or even using hemp on a homestead level? Are they waiting for a certain no fees or no licenses or anything like that? Because I've just seen a huge interest in homesteading with hemp, and I think that would be a great group that would really take it on.
No, they jumped in 2019. A lot of those early farmers were, Amish and Mennonite, dairy farmers who wanted to, they were, everybody had dollar signs in their eyes, and so they thought, oh, the dairy industry is struggling, let's get into hemp. But yeah, I mean, I've talked to lots of Amish farmers who still grow hemp. The Amish community loves the medicinal aspect of it. I've been to hemp meetings at field walks and things, and just anecdotally talking to people and how much CBD has changed their lives. And I've seen some Amish farmers who have branded CBD. There's some that have gotten into smokable stuff. It's kind of a little crazy to think like, oh, here are these plain folk who are now like selling Delta 8 pre-rolls. Like, it's complicated, right? But it's happening here. I think there's probably a lot of interest with some Amish growers to be getting into the THC side of things. So one of the early interviews I had, I guess it was in January or February of 2019, was with the bicycle guy. What's his name? He won the Tour de France in 96, but then they took it away from him, I think. Not Lance Armstrong, but the other guy. Hold on. Floyd's of Leadville, right? Have you heard of that guy? Floyd Landis, Lancaster County boy here. He got a whole bunch of Amish farmers to grow for him in 2019. I don't know how that ended up for the farmers, but I get the sense that it didn't end well for them. I don't think anyone made any money from what he was trying to do. But yeah, a lot of interest, I think, on the Amish side.
That's incredible. Such a cross section of American cultures, and Pennsylvania, really. I've grown up in Virginia. We have a lot of similar hemp history and very close regional, and I believe that area is going to be a true powerhouse of, making or cultivating, processing, production, and manufacturing, and using those goods all in the same area where it was grown, which is the original intent of this amazing crop. So hopefully it comes to life there.
Yeah.
And in your opinion, Eric, people in Pennsylvania specifically, it differs from region to region. But why do you believe people should be growing industrial hemp? You cited the climate positive feedback loop, but what else? Why the markets or the benefit to the soil? In your opinion, why should people in Pennsylvania be growing hemp?
Yeah, all of those things. So if we can grow hemp at scale, we know a lot about the carbon sequestration sort of power of the crop. So if we can have lots of hemp grown here, we're also going to need processing facilities here, because, if you ship it too far, you kind of lose those carbon benefits. So we need localized supply chains. And once that happens, because I'm a believer that this is going to happen. We're still early, but it's going to revitalize small town America. You're going to have manufacturing jobs back here again. We shipped them all overseas. I grew up near Pottstown, right? It's just a little town up the river from Philadelphia, and there used to be industry there. Like, there was steel industry, and like apparently the steel for the Golden Gate Bridge was manufactured here in Pottstown. And so there's this great history of making things here in Pennsylvania, but now all of these little towns are just sad little towns, right? Just like, and I just think we could bring jobs back, jobs with dignity. We can rebuild the middle class. Like, there's just so many economic reasons that hemp is beneficial. So it's like there's so many different problems in the world, from environmental stuff to social ills to economic things. And I think we can farm our way out of most of these problems, right? And I think at some point soon, other people are going to feel that way, right? Because I mean, I've seen stories lately. There was one in the Guardian last week about, wait, can hemp actually help with climate change? And I'm like, people were sending this story to me. I'm like, yeah, that's been my message all along. So I feel like, we're getting there. So yeah, I mean, there's so many benefits to industrial hemp, and yeah.
I appreciate the heck out of your answer, and being from Pennsylvania, that is, I think it's, some people kind of over assume how much hemp can do, with benefiting the environment and the soil and stuff right away. But I think the main, it'll improve us all individually when we have pride in what we produce and how we treat our land and the products we use. I couldn't agree more. And it's hard to put that into a slogan or a word, but how cool would it be to be using things we make here? I think we've really lost touch with how important that is, and having transparency into our own supply chains and having pride in the things we make. So that's awesome to hear, and I really hope that people resonate with that in Pennsylvania and across the East Coast, because that's really where we had original hemp industry, as you were describing before, and people can tap back into their roots and such. But I love it.
We've got so many great farmers here, and amazing farmland, and yeah, it just seems like the time is right. There's the one project out in Western Pennsylvania that I should mention. It's called the Project PA Hemp Home, and it's a group called Dawn Services. They're out in Newcastle, PA, and they grew hemp, or they teamed up with some farmers. They grew fiber hemp. And they found just a residential home. This is sort of like a proof of concept. They stripped it down to studs, and then they rebuilt it using hempcrete. And then the hemp that they grew in their fields, they turned into hemp wood for the flooring. And so here's the shining example of how you can, create healthy homes for people using material that was farmed. The way hempcrete works, it replaces all of that toxic stuff in your walls, like the sheetrock and the styrofoam and the Tyvek, and it's just things that off gas, and I don't know. So it's very encouraging, and that project was partially funded by the Department of Agriculture. So another example of our our state ag department being supportive. So yeah,
well, that's incredible. I hope those guys are able to get the public appreciation and push and get more and more hemp growing and processing up in that area. In your opinion, getting able to talk to all these different groups and such, what is the greatest hurdle? Is it genetics they can't find? Is it identifying the right type of processing equipment? Is it all just that you got to do it really slowly and grow slowly year after year? What do you think is, how can we speed things up, or what hurdles are people running into?
Yeah, good question. I think it's a couple of different things. It's sort of weird regulation, right? It's lack of investment, lack of processing. If we need to make it easier for farmers to grow hemp, right? Like, people don't want to go get fingerprinted every year and pay this crazy thing, crazy fee, or have the state come out to your field a couple times a year and take samples. Because if you're growing for fiber and grain, the THC content is irrelevant, right? No one's going to be trying to sneak their pot plants into a fiber or grain field. Like, if you've seen what these plants look like, it's not going to happen. CBD growers, yeah, there's CBD growers out there growing marijuana. But again, topic for a different conversation. So yeah, we need sensible regulation. We need investment, and that's it. I mean, honestly, I think, and some education, because there is still the stigma. There's the double stigma, the marijuana stigma and the CBD stigma. But it's like, farmers are going to grow this. They're going to know what to do, because it's farming. It's like growing grain. It's like so there was a lot of talk in the beginning of at least my podcast, like, how do we get farmers in on this? And I've come to the realization now, like, oh no, farmers will be fine. They're going to know what to do. We need markets, right? We need markets, and we need to make it easy for them to get in and to scale this. And I look around at the world and I see so much money, right? Like, obscene amounts of money, right? Like, what's the Elon Musk guy with his billions and billions of dollars, or the what's the Bezos guy? Jeff Bezos could change things with like just a policy decision, right? He could say, all right, by 2025, I want 25% of my Amazon packages to be made from, oh, I don't know, hemp, right? And boom, overnight, you would see an industry just like develop trying to, take care of that. So, I mean, that's it. Once we have processing, the farmers will show up, but the problem with industry, like so many industries want to use hemp, from automobile manufacturers to paper companies to textiles, but they can't get enough supply. And that's a big issue, right? So let's make it easy. Let's I don't know if it's through private investment or through government incentives or a combination of the both, but we should be making it easy for this industry to succeed.
I think you're right on spot.
Choir here, I know.
We've discovered the similar kind of the farmers are interested in growing a crop for money. They don't eat all that broccoli they grow. They don't eat all that soybean they grow. They grow things for funds and they exchange. And it's a pretty standard system. But yeah, I think it's a little dangerous to be going out inspiring farmers to grow hemp with no further supply chain in place. It'll almost deter the movement from the start. But yeah, I completely concur that it is the markets that need to drive the demand. People do horrible things like cut sharks and chop their fin off and throw them back in because there's a demand for shark fin soup, or there's random things out there that people will create demands for. I joke that if they made hemp illegal, we'd be producing way more of it because there's so many things that are fully illegal that we produce the heck out of. But that is I do agree, it'll be the demand that will drive. Is there any specific demand drivers maybe in Pennsylvania you can think of, like state organizations or groups that we should be hounding down for an easy?
Well, I think Western PA, there's a lot of plastic industry there, so we could shift that from oil to biomaterial. I think paper would be a good one. I think honestly, it's the grain that once they can make it legal to feed hemp grain to livestock, it's going to just crack it wide open. And, I would like, hemp would just be one of the crops in the rotation. Right. Interesting story. When I was traveling around the country last summer, we were in Murray, Kentucky. I had just stopped and talked to Greg Wilson at Hempwood, and one of his mentors is Dr. Tony Brannan. He's the so-called Dean of Hemp from Murray State University. And he was telling me the story about when he was a kid, he was on his grandparents' farm and they grew soybeans, right? Like big deal, right? And he's like, no, they grew it as a forage crop. It wasn't like the huge crop that it is now. It was just like some, random little crop that you might grow like, I don't even know what, like alfalfa or some kind of, grass or something. It wasn't the huge industry that it is now. And so that gets me thinking like, okay, so it is possible to introduce a new crop into, the ag industry. And so, 60 years later, soybeans is the number 2 crop in the world after corn. So I don't know, let's fast forward 30 years and let's see where hemp is, as a grain, as a fiber, as a raw material for, everything we need. Interesting stuff coming out of, the National Hemp Growers Co-op. And they have this thing about renewable natural gas from hemp. There's just so many different avenues you can go down. So
I completely agree. Yeah, well, no, I resonate with that big time. And I don't mean to bring up a horrible act like the harvesting the sharks, but just to say that a demand in a market will drive people to create. It's often very hard to do it the opposite direction, come up with a bunch of material and then find ways to get it into the market. We see that bringing industries to a quick halt.
Well, I think about that sometimes. It's like, going back to my, hypothetical scenario with Jeff Bezos. What if there was some billionaire, we've got who just was like, I want this to happen, so I'm going to pay all of you farmers to grow fiber hemp, and then we just stockpile it, right? and we just have it everywhere because we need to grow it at scale, right? If it's going to move the needle on carbon sequestration. So if we could just grow it, stockpile it, and then, the entrepreneurs, the American ingenuity, whatever, would figure out what to do with it because it would be everywhere. It's like, let's figure out how to use it. So I'm good at spending other people's money, apparently. But we could get into, like, is it really ethical to have billions of dollars when there's people out there suffering? Again, another topic for another conversation.
Well, no, I think what you're saying, though, in Europe, one of the big drivers, one of the biggest uses by weight of hemp fiber is in automotive parts. And the automotive industry in the EU encouraged that through tax incentives, and the companies like Renault and Ford, European Ford made goals, put the benchmarks in place for themselves to meet. And I think that's more along the lines of something that's realistic, maybe to reach out to some of these companies and say, hey, as part of your sustainability goals, by 2025, how about incorporating X amount of natural fibers? I think natural fibers is an easier pitch. I think that's what they have in the EU model. So it incorporates flax and hemp, and it's more agnostic. It's just natural materials that are being grown from the land. But that is, maybe we should put more brain power to reaching out to those big companies that have that kind of market pool that could, or put that in front of the USHBA and the NHA and tell them, hey, we need to go make demand like they did with Got Milk and with these other types of initiatives to bring those, larger market appeal. And that is a great idea.
Yeah, the Got Milk campaign, that's a checkoff program. And that's where dairy producers voluntarily put money into a pot for marketing. I don't know if hemp is there yet, but we need like some kind of like marketing genius to come in and be like, oh, here's how you do this. You know what I mean? Like, too bad Steve Jobs died, right? Like maybe, but there's more people out there like that, right? So I think if we could find some kind of like, brilliant, out of the box thinker, neurodivergent thinker who can come up with some way to reach, the masses. Because I think not only do we need, industry to want to move in that direction, we need consumers to demand it. Because maybe that's how we're going to reach the businesses. Like, oh, my customers want this, so let's move towards that.
I completely agree. That is a good sentiment and a way to approach this. And I think we would have seen much more success in all industries, but including the cannabinoid market and things of that nature, if there was big players like Coca-Cola or, people who were saying earlier than the production, we will uptake it if you make it. But yeah, no, that is, I completely agree.
That gets to, the FDA right there. The reason we didn't see that is because the FDA has just stayed silent on any of that, it could have been different.
Yeah. Well, that is the way they like to see the private market. Maybe play itself into a position first before they can better regulate it and learn more about it. But no, that is, I really do. I think the mindset has changed with a lot of movers and shakers in the hemp space, or people trying to inspire the public to take this on. The only thing about the growing of the hemp and stockpiling it is if it's not grown properly. You want some standard operating procedures around how far to grow it, how to cut it, how to ret it, and that's a better relationship to have with a processor who's going to be buying that stuff and wants to set those specifications early. But no, I think that is, there's a company in Kentucky that left a good amount of hemp fiber sitting out in barns, and it inspired a lot of people to figure out how to use it, or people use that material to figure out their own fiber processing. But it's tough when there's nothing to work with out of the gate. And so having hemp around, so a combination of, but I think I'm a big fan of seeking the large government contracts here in the United States, as they're one of the biggest spenders and the most reliable compensators. And they have huge highway projects and, infrastructure build outs that could use so many things made of natural fibers, including hemp. So maybe that would be a route to more of an immediate public route to pursue, is these large government infrastructure builds that they're planning.
I think part of the issue here in the U.S. is the, how do I say it? Climate change is a political issue, which is just crazy. It's like, okay, like you get to choose whether you believe in it or not. But I don't know. I mean, I was born in the 70s and I have seen things change, right? Over the course of my life, things have changed. And it tracks pretty much with, the industrial age, right? So I don't know. I don't mean to bring politics into this, but I guess I just did.
Well, it's all good. That is, it's not, none of these decisions are made in vacuums or isolated. There are lots of hurdles and things in the way, but what are the most exciting developments you have seen as far as maybe a new technology or a new way to use hemp?
Um, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff happening. I think like the development for me that happened over the course of this year is really that shift to people thinking about fiber and processors coming online. Like I know of some in Texas that are coming online. I just interviewed the CEO of a company in Kansas who has a processing facility. There's people in Pennsylvania who are talking about it. It's like it's happening. So for me, like that's the greatest development, that we're getting closer to having the processing capacity. I was just at the Pennsylvania Hemp Summit a few weeks ago, and there were some great presentations there, with the uses of hemp, for clothing and like smart clothing. Like I'm not like a science guy, but just like some really neat things happening with fabrics. And I don't know, just like I am just always blown away by the researchers at universities. Like here we have Jefferson University in Philadelphia, where they're involved with I guess a company called Hemp Black, and they're doing some just really neat things in textile. So yeah, there's that. But I keep coming back to like it's the food. Like we have to get the grain markets opened up. I mean, I think hempcrete is amazing. Like I just love the idea of growing our houses in the fields, right? Like it's just like, it seems so simple. I'm like a simpleton, I guess, really. It's like, sometimes the, what's it, Occam's razor. It's like the simple way to go is the right way to go. But there's just so much noise. There's so much like other industries, who are making money a certain way, and they're resistant to change. So we need a paradigm shift. My hope is that our younger generations are going to help us push that paradigm.
I agree. And you've touched on it a few times, mentioning that the grain market can crack open the fiber market. I'm familiar with what you're describing. For the listener, how do you see that playing out, or why would that be? I think you're referring to a dual purpose model, and how would that play out, or why would that impact fiber?
Right. Well, if you grow the grain, right, and because hemp produces a whole lot of grain, it grows on a plant that has a stalk, right? And then so the folks out in Montana, IND Hemp, that was their reasoning for getting into fiber processing, because they started out growing for grain. And it's like, well, all right, they grew grain, and then their farmers are like, what do I do with all this straw in the field? So they're like, oh, okay, there's a byproduct that we can also, monetize. So yeah, I think it could work.
Yeah, and from our a processor's perspective, if you're looking to grow fiber hemp and you're asking a farmer to grow it for you, and he's only getting one thing out of his field, which is his fiber stocks, you're gonna have to pay him a lot more for that fiber stock. If you can get a similar quality stock and he's getting a fair income or revenue off of the grain, he's going to be much more willing to accept a lower price point on that fiber stock per se, or a deal or a structure that works out. But it's kind of a travesty up in Canada. They've been growing hemp seeds for since 1998 or so, a huge market that exports around the world. Been a long time coming that they have more fiber processing coming online, but for many years there, they were, either composting or burning.
Because they weren't allowed to use it, right? Like
right.
In the way they set up their hemp program, they could only harvest the grain, from what I understand.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what I heard. But it's not always going to be a dual crop thing, because for different textile applications, you're not going to want those kinds of stalks, because you're going to need them taller or thinner. There's all sorts of different things, genetically, that we need to figure out. But that's coming. The other thing about the farmers is that they're going to get paid for their carbon too, right? So they're going to be making more because our farmers are the most important people in our society, in my opinion, right? They grow our food, they grow our clothing. They're just have such an important role, and I sort of like go into the future. I'm like, oh, maybe hemp will bring more people into farming, right? Because there was a time when most people in America were connected to agriculture. And now it's like 1, maybe 2% of the population is connected to ag. And it's a disconnect that has led to a lot of problems, like nutritional problems and, economic problems. But I think if more people were connected to the land, to our food, it would just be a better place.
I concur wholeheartedly with you. I think that is.
Let's find something we disagree on, Ryan.
Well, I want to ask you. So I have a peculiar, to see if you've looked into it. There's a picture on the back of the 1914 $10 bill, I believe, and they happen to be both sides of the back of the. It's called a horse blanket bill. It used to be a larger bill than we make now, but they have very notable. It's kind of toted around. I know several hemp enthusiasts that have purchased these $10 bills, and there's kind of an ongoing debate whether the field being grown on the back in York County, Pennsylvania is of hemp or another variety of another crop. And I don't want to be the one to tell people it might not be hemp. And I think personally that it does look like hemp fiber being grown and bundled. But have you had a chance to look into this interesting topic?
I've seen that. I haven't done any research on it, but I've definitely looked at that. It's like an engraving on there, and yeah, I mean it could be, but back in 1914, were they really growing any fiber hemp in York County? I'm not so sure about that, because from what I understand, like the hemp industry sort of died back before that. It was being grown in just a few states around the country, wasn't as ubiquitous as it was, in the 1700s. So I don't know. I think you could go either way on that. And is there any definitive way to find out without a time machine?
We got to contact the descendants of the original engraver and nail him down and really get some answers. Get his diaries opened up. Because it's an ongoing question that we really need an answer. I see it like at hemp history museums and all that, and how embarrassing if it's flax or something.
Right. I mean, because in the image they're like putting it together in sort of like stacks, right?
Right.
And they do that with other crops. I've seen the Amish do that with corn. So I don't know.
Well, it's an open case that we need to get to the bottom of. But well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Eric. We really appreciate your journaling on and reporting on the space, especially in a hemp hub, the keystone state of Pennsylvania. Exciting to see things coming together. You guys have hemp builders and hemp historians and nonprofits setting up processing. You're an inspiration for the rest of the country, and hopefully that continues to. You guys continue to be a driving force on the East Coast. And
well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an honor to do this work and to do it for Lancaster Farming newspaper, because like we see hemp as this opportunity for our farmers, right? And so if I can help develop the industry, then that's good work. So I'm proud to be doing it, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to talk to you guys. So appreciate what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. And just to recap, Eric brought to mind a lot of hemp benefits we don't always talk about. There's the carbon sequestration and the cleaning of the soils and enhancing the nutrient profile of the topsoil and all that. But Eric really bringing the top of mind that this could re-inspire, American pride in what we make, and could reignite the fan the fire of rural American economies. And it's just something that's truly, we haven't seen anything like this in our lifetime, or at least mine. And it's a unique opportunity that I think we're not putting enough credence on for what it could do. And, people like myself and you and Matt that see this every day, we're truly moved, and hopefully we can move more and more people into being consumers and believers in this movement. So I appreciate it very much.
All right. Thank you.
Well, we'll sign off here from Have You Heard? Thank you for tuning in for another episode, and we will talk with you guys soon. Cheers.